In 1513, Leonardo da Vinci discovered the exact fluid dynamics of the human heart.
Right.
And it was a biomechanical breakthrough so incredibly advanced that medical science could not actually confirm his findings until the invention of the MRI machine.
Yeah, which is what, some 4.5 centuries later?
Exactly. 4.5 centuries later, but at the exact same time, using the exact same brilliant brain, he was entirely convinced that human blood slocked up and down our veins like sap in a tree.
Yeah, and that massive contradiction right there is exactly why the popular image of him is so fundamentally broken today.
Yeah.
We have this culturally ingrained habit of treating Leonardo like a lonely prophet. You know, a guy who dropped in from the future, left us a stack of miraculous blueprints for helicopters and submarines, and then just vanished.
Right, the whole time traveler myth.
Exactly. But that mythological framing completely blinds us to how the man actually thought, and honestly, more importantly, it blinds us to how he failed.
Which is exactly what we are getting into today. So, welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are looking at a brilliant, recently published book from 2026 called The Universal Mind, Leonardo da Vinci and the Unity of Knowledge. And this is by the philosopher Boris Kriger.
It's such a fantastic read.
It really is. And our mission here is to dismantle that time-traveling prophet myth once and for all. We're going to explore how the most brilliant mind of the 15th century discovered more about the natural world than anyone else alive, yet managed to pass almost none of it on.
Right.
And the reasons why are going to fundamentally challenge how you think about what knowledge actually is.
Yeah, Boris Krieger's book does something really vital here. He argues that we have to strip away the centuries of reverence to see the actual working engineer underneath the myth.
We have to look at the flaws.
Exactly. We need to look at his flaws, his methodology, and the specific roadblocks of his era. And to really understand how his brain was wired, we actually have to start with a seemingly dry legal technicality from his childhood.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because we need to look at his childhood here, mainly because the legal bureaucracy of 15th century Tuscany is actually what forced his brain to work this way in the first place. Right?
Yeah, it really is.
This is where the whole chosen one myth starts falling apart. I mean, Leonardo wasn't born into academic royalty.
No, not at all.
He was the illegitimate son of a notary.
Right, and in the highly structured society of Renaissance Florence, illegitimacy was a massive bureaucratic wall.
Wow.
The notarial guild, which was, the respectable family business of drawing up contracts and legal documents.
The lawyers of the day, basically.
Pretty much, yeah. Well, that guild was strictly closed to anyone born out of wedlock.
Wait, so if his parents had just been married, the greatest artistic and scientific mind in human history would have spent his life pushing paper in a Tuscan legal office.
Almost certainly, yeah. He would have followed his father into the guild. That's just how things worked. But because he was shut out of the family trade, he was also shut out of the educational track that prepared you for it.
Oh, I see.
And crucially, this meant he was denied a formal Latin education. And we have to pause and understand what Latin meant in the 1400s.
It wasn't just a dead language you studied for fun.
No, not at all. It wasn't just a language you learned to sound cultured. Latin was basically the operating system for all theoretical knowledge.
Right.
Mathematics, physics, astronomy, classical medicine. If you couldn't read Latin or ancient Greek, you were locked out of the entire intellectual establishment.
You couldn't read Archimedes, you couldn't read Euclid.
Exactly, you were flying blind.
So instead of a classical academy, his father sends him to an abacus school at age 10. What did they actually teach a 10-year-old at a Renaissance business school?
Well, it was essentially training for future shopkeepers and merchants.
Oh.
They drilled the kids on practical commercial math. So you'd learn currency conversions across different city-states, profit sharing, calculating interest, and the absolute core of the curriculum was the rule of 3, or proportion.
Okay, so the idea that A relates to B in this way, then C must relate to D in the same way.
Precisely. And that was the entirety of his formal education. Just a couple of years of learning how mathematical relationships and proportions can be transferred from one commercial situation to another. And then his formal schooling was over.
So he grows up carrying this massive chip on his shoulder about this, right?
Oh, huge.
He famously and proudly called himself an homo sans letter, which means a man without letters. He couldn't read the established scientific authorities of his day, so he just dismissed them entirely.
Yeah, he basically said, I don't need your books.
It feels like a brilliant coder today who gets rejected from MIT, doesn't know any of the standard programming languages, and just completely refuses to read the open source documentation.
That is a perfect way to look at it.
They just hole up in a basement and invent an entirely new operating system from absolute scratch just by observing how the natural world works.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, that lack of formal classical education turned out to be his greatest intellectual superpower.
Really? How so?
Because he was never taught the standard curriculum, he had no disciplinary walls in his head.
I see.
No professor ever told him that hydraulics, anatomy, optics, and geology were entirely separate fields of study that shouldn't be mixed.
Right, because why would they be?
Exactly. So, drawing on that abacus school training with proportions, he developed one master method for understanding the entire universe, and that method was analogy.
Analogy?
Yes. He operated on the fundamental, unwavering assumption that the natural world repeats itself at different scales.
Because he didn't have academic boundaries, he just assumed the whole universe was built on these repeating proportions. Which, I mean, it sounds like a beautiful, poetic way to look at the world.
It is, but he took it literally. If two things look similar physically, he assumed they must operate by the exact same mechanical rules.
Okay, so let's get into how he applied this, because here's where it gets really interesting. We see the analogical method act as a total double-edged sword. Let's look at the absolute triumph of this method first.
Right, the water.
Yeah, Leonardo was obsessed with the movement of water. He spent years sitting by rivers watching how water flows around stones, sketching these incredibly intricate interlocking spirals and eddies.
Yeah, his notebooks are just full of these water sketches.
And then he takes that observation of a river and applies it directly to the human heart.
Right. He watched those vortices in the water and assumed, using his strict method of analogy, that blood inside the human heart must behave the exact same way when it hits an obstacle.
Wow.
But he didn't just write down a philosophical guess. He actually built a physical laboratory experiment to prove it.
Okay, wait. How?
Well, he got the heart of a slaughtered ox, and he poured hot wax into the aorta to get a perfect three-dimensional cast of the internal shape of the aortic valve.
That is wild. And he didn't have modern tools to do this. He was essentially inventing complex laboratory equipment from scratch just to prove a hunch.
It's an astonishing level of craftsmanship. I mean, once he had that solid wax cast, he used it to blow a delicate, perfectly scaled glass model of the heart valve around it.
A glass heart valve.
Yes. And then, to simulate blood, he pumped water mixed with tiny grass seeds through this glass heart so he could visually trace the fluid dynamics.
Oh, that's brilliant. The grass seeds act like a contrast dye in a modern angiogram.
Exactly. And as he pumped the water, he saw that as the fluid pushed through the valve, it swirled backward into the little anatomical bulges behind the valve leaflets, creating those exact same vortices he saw in the river.
So the water proved it.
It did. And he realized that those swirling vortices are actually what pushed the heart valve closed from the sides, not the blood falling backward from above. He mapped it, he drew it, and he was completely perfectly right.
Which brings us back to that MRI machine from the intro.
Yeah.
Medical science didn't actually confirm this until 1968. They had to use modern flow apparatus to see what a guy with no formal education figured out in the 1500s with some hot wax, glass, and grass seeds. It is a stunning victory for his analogical method. Fluid in a river, fluid in a heart, the physics are identical.
But then, using the exact same analogical method, he walked straight into a wall. So he spent a lot of time observing the branching structure of trees. He noticed the trunk is thickest at the base, and it tapers progressively as it goes up into the branches.
Makes sense.
He then looked at the human vascular system. He saw that the veins and arteries are thickest at the heart, and they taper as they move outward into the limbs.
So far, so good. But then we get to the trees, and things go totally off the rails.
Yeah, applying his absolute rule of analogy, he assumed that because the physical branching structures were identical, the underlying biological mechanism must be identical.
Oh, no.
So he concluded that blood must originate at the point of greatest thickness, the heart, and flow out to the extremities and back, ebbing and flowing throughout the day, exactly the way sap rises and falls in a plant.
Wait, hold on. He seriously thought I have sap sloshing up and down my arm?
He really did.
I mean, he was surrounded by butchers and battlefields in Renaissance Italy. Did he never just tie off a vein to see what happens? How did a guy who was brilliant enough to map the microscopic fluid dynamics of a heart valve just completely ignore basic biology? Blood circulates in a one-way loop.
It's a closed circulation system, yes. But because the analogy of the tree dictated his thinking, His brain literally couldn't process contradictory evidence. He was completely wrong, and he was stuck on this sap theory for the rest of his life, drawing the vascular system in ever finer detail, totally unable to break out of his own framework.
To me, this is the most terrifying realization in Krieger's entire book. Think about Leonardo sitting alone in his workshop. His absolute best idea about the heart valves and his absolute worst idea about blood behaving like tree sap felt exactly the same to him internally.
Exactly.
The spark of inspiration, the logical deduction, the feeling of certainty, it was identical.
Yeah.
So how on earth are we supposed to know the difference between a brilliant paradigm-shifting connection and a total delusion?
And that is Boris Krieger's core insight regarding Leonardo's methodology. Analogy is not a proof. It is merely a hypothesis generator.
A hypothesis generator.
Right.
Oh.
It works beautifully when the underlying physics actually are the same, like fluid dynamics operating in both a river and a blood vessel, because physics doesn't care what the pipe is made of.
Right. Water is water.
But analogy fails disastrously when the mechanism is different, like the osmotic flow of sap versus the pressurized circulation of blood. And here's the tragedy of Leonardo's life. Without a scientific community to bounce ideas off of, he had no filter.
He had no peer review whatsoever.
None. He had no colleagues to look at his drawings and say, hey, the vortex idea with the glass heart is brilliant, but the sap idea is biologically impossible.
Yeah.
When you are entirely alone with your thoughts, your errors survive right alongside your discoveries, carrying the exact same weight in your mind.
But wait, if he is spending months injecting hot wax into ox hearts and watching grass seeds float in water, who is actually paying for all this?
Well, that's the thing.
I mean, how did his wealthy patrons, the dukes and the kings, tolerate a guy who was essentially playing with fluid dynamics when he was supposed to be painting their portraits?
The short answer is they barely tolerated it.
Really?
Oh, yeah. His completion rate is staggering in the worst possible way. There are fewer than 20 paintings that survive today that art historians can confidently attribute to him.
Less than 20.
Less than 20. He carried the Mona Lisa around with him for a decade, endlessly tweaking the microscopic layers of glaze, never actually delivering it to the merchant who commissioned it.
Oh, wow. And when he did try to finish things, his obsessive need to experiment actively ruined them, like The Last Supper. We think of it as this pristine, untouchable masterpiece, but didn't it start falling apart while he was still eating dinner in the same building?
It was a complete technical disaster.
Okay.
And to understand why, you have to look at the chemistry of traditional fresco. Standard fresco requires you to paint quickly onto wet lime plaster. As the plaster dries, it reacts with carbon dioxide in the air to form a crystalline matrix of calcium carbonate.
So a chemical reaction.
Exactly. It literally becomes stone, and the pigment gets locked permanently inside that stone.
So you have to paint at the speed of drying plaster. You have, what, a few hours, and then the wall is locked.
Yeah. No do-overs, no subtle revisions, and Leonardo absolutely hated that.
He wanted to tweak.
Oh, he wanted to sit and stare at the wall for 3 days, make 2 delicate brushstrokes, and then leave to go study the optic nerve of a cow.
Right. No.
So instead of wet fresco, he used an experimental mixture of tempera and oil on a completely dry wall in a damp room backing onto a monastery kitchen.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. Because there was no chemical crystallization to bind the paint to the wall, the painting literally began flaking and peeling off while he was still alive.
And he didn't learn his lesson from this. Because a few years later, he gets commissioned to paint this massive mural, the Battle of Anghiari. And instead of using oil, he decides to resurrect an ancient Roman wax technique called encaustic.
Right, which requires intense heat to bake the wax and pigment into the wall.
How did he even do that?
He had to bring massive iron braziers filled with burning coals into the room to melt the wax, but basic thermodynamics kicked in. The heat couldn't evenly reach the top of the massive mural.
So the bottom bakes.
The bottom makes fine, but at the top, the wax just melted and the colors literally dripped down the plaster, ruining the entire piece.
Oh, man. And the horse. We can't forget the horse.
Oh, the horse.
He was commissioned by the Duke of Milan to build an equestrian monument, a bronze horse 3 times life size. He spends a full decade just obsessing over the anatomy of horses.
Just studying horses.
Right. He designs massive molds. He invents complex new venting systems to pour 70 tons of molten bronze in a single pour so it wouldn't crack.
Yeah.
He finally builds this jaw-dropping clay model in the courtyard to prepare for the casting. And then a war breaks out.
Yeah, the French invade. And the Duke of Milan realizes he needs artillery more than art, so he takes all 70 tons of Leonardo's bronze and melts it down to make cannons.
Wow.
And when the French soldiers finally take the city, they use Leonardo's beautiful decade-in-the-making clay horse for target practice, blowing it to pieces with crossbows.
That is so depressing.
It prompted Pope Leo X to complain, with weary accuracy, that Leonardo thinks about the end before the beginning.
I think anyone listening to this who currently has 40 browser tabs open, 3 half-written emails in their drafts, and a neglected passion project they swear they'll finish someday can feel both consoled and slightly insulted by this comparison.
Yeah, it's very relatable.
It's the ultimate historical ADHD trap.
And what Kriger asks us to do here is stop separating his genius from his unreliability. We have a habit of celebrating his broad, universal curiosity while treating his failure to finish things as a separate, unfortunate character flaw.
Right, we compartmentalize it.
We do, but Kriger argues that Leonardo's universality and his incompletion are the exact same fact.
What's fascinating here is you really can't separate the two.
You cannot. A mind that cannot look at a commissioned painting of the Madonna without getting distracted by how light refracts through the atmosphere, and then how the human optic nerve processes that refraction, and then how that relates to the anatomy of an ox's eye.
Right.
Well, that mind is going to see connections nobody else in human history sees. But it is absolutely not going to deliver the painting on time. You cannot have the visionary without the flake.
That is a tough pill to swallow for our modern productivity culture, where we demand people be both endlessly creative and perfectly optimized.
Very true.
But this inability to finish projects didn't just ruin his art commissions, it extended to his scientific work. So his art is melting, peeling, or being melted down for cannons. But at least he has his science, right? The famous notebooks. Which leads us to the ultimate tragedy of Leonardo da Vinci.
Yes, around 7,000 surviving pages of notes, though historians estimate he likely wrote tens of thousands more that are lost.
Wow.
And for centuries, a massive myth surrounded these notebooks. The idea that he wrote them in a secret, encoded mirror script to protect his brilliant discoveries from the Inquisition or from intellectual thieves.
Right, the whole Da Vinci Code thing.
Yeah.
Which we now know is completely false. He wasn't inventing a cipher. He was just a left-handed guy writing with messy, slow-drying Renaissance ink.
Yeah.
I mean, if a lefty writes left to right, their hand drags through the wet ink and smears the page.
Yeah.
Writing right to left, mirror script was just faster and cleaner for his personal private notes.
Exactly. The handwriting was just a practical life hack. The real tragedy isn't how the words were written, it's what happened to the physical paper.
What do you mean?
Because of his inability to finish anything, those 7,000 pages were left completely unsorted and unindexed. He never synthesized them. He made no distinction between a stray philosophical thought, a grocery list, and a groundbreaking law of physics.
Right, you can find a shopping list for mustard and chalk right next to his articulation of the laws of friction, which are laws he discovered 200 years before the French physicist Guillaume Amonton, who eventually published them and got all the historical credit.
Exactly. Because Leonardo never actually assembled a single scientific treatise, he just tossed the loose pages into a box. And what happened to that box after he died is genuinely heartbreaking.
Yeah, this part hurts to read.
After his death, his notebooks eventually fell into the hands of a sculptor named Pompeo Leoni.
Okay.
And Leoni realized they were valuable, but he decided they were too messy and needed to be tidied up. So he literally took a pair of scissors to the pages, cutting them apart to separate the beautiful artistic drawings from the dense technical sketches.
Oh, no.
And in doing so, he completely destroyed the chronological and intellectual context of Leonardo's thought process.
He butchered the greatest scientific diary in history to make scrapbooks.
Basically. And then those scattered fragments were blown all across Europe. Napoleon dragged a suitcase of them back to Paris as war loot. Entire volumes were misfiled in a Spanish library and lost for 250 years.
Wow.
We have to contrast this chaotic, tragic fate with a contemporary of his, the mathematician Luca Pacioli.
Pacioli actually lived and worked closely with Leonardo in Milan, didn't he?
They were friends. Pacioli wrote a book called De Divina Proportione, which summarized the era's knowledge of geometry, and Leonardo actually drew the illustrations for it, these beautiful, complex skeletal polyhedra.
So they collaborated.
They did. But here's the crucial difference. Pacioli actually took his manuscript to a printer in Venice. He finished the job.
He shipped it.
He shipped it. Because it was printed, that book survived. It circulated. It influenced the actual progression of mathematics in Europe. It is literally the only work of Leonardo's to enter the intellectual bloodstream of Europe during his lifetime, and it only happened because he was subordinate to a friar who had the discipline to finish a book and hit publish.
Which forces us to ask a really tough philosophical question.
Mm.
Are we giving Leonardo too much credit? I mean, if a tree falls in a forest and no one hears it, if a genius figures out the laws of friction and the closure of heart valves and the mechanics of flight, but he just writes it backwards in a notebook, shoves it in an attic, and dies, did he actually contribute to science?
That is the most brutal and honestly the most important question Kriger asks in the book, and his answer is a definitive no.
No.
No. Kriger makes this incredibly bold epistemological claim. He says, knowledge is a transaction.
A transaction, meaning it requires two parties.
Exactly. If a true fact about the universe is written backwards in an attic and nobody can use it, verify it, or build upon it, epistemologically speaking, it is completely indistinguishable from a truth that nobody ever had.
Ouch. That stings because we so heavily romanticize the eureka moment.
It hurts because we view the private moment of discovery as the grand, heroic achievement, and we view publication or sharing as just the boring administrative paperwork you do afterward.
Right, just the bureaucracy of it all.
But Kriger argues that is entirely backwards. Publication is not just a receipt of the discovery. Publication is the crucible where a thought becomes actual knowledge.
Yeah.
Until it is subjected to the friction of the real world, until it is shared and tested, it is just a private mental state. It doesn't actually exist as knowledge.
So if Leonardo is the ultimate cautionary tale of the lone wolf operating in a vacuum, what is the alternative? How does actual progress happen?
Kriger contrasts Leonardo's isolated notebooks with modern examples of how real breakthroughs happen. He looks at Catalin Carrico, the pioneer of the mRNA technology that made the COVID vaccines possible.
Oh, great example.
Right. For years, mRNA research was a dead end. She lost funding, she was demoted. But she didn't just hide in a basement and write cryptic notes.
Right.
She went to the photocopier, she talked to colleagues, she teamed up with an immunologist named Drew Weissman to solve the inflammation problem that was holding the technology back.
Yeah.
She published, she went to conferences, she relied on a community to iterate.
She used the friction of the scientific community to filter her ideas. And Kriger also brings up the Wright brothers.
Yeah, the Wright brothers are a perfect example. They didn't just sit on a hill in Kitty Hawk and dream up a flying machine in total isolation.
Right.
They actively wrote to the Smithsonian Institution asking for every published paper on aeronautics. When they realized the existing data on air pressure was wrong, they built wind tunnels to correct other people's flawed data.
So they were interacting with the field.
Constantly. They corresponded continuously with a global network of engineers. They succeeded precisely because they relied on published literature, institutions, and community correction.
They sought out exactly what Leonardo actively lacked, or honestly, actively avoided. He hated the friction of the establishment. And there's this one specific detail in the book that just perfectly shatters the myth of the time-traveling Superman.
Oh, I know the one you mean.
It's the very last dated line in his surviving 7,000 pages of notes. It's June 24, 1518. He's in his 60s, living in France, in the middle of working out a complex geometry problem regarding right-angle triangles. And he just stops halfway through the page and writes, etc. Perché la minestra si fredda.
Because the soup is getting cold.
The soup is getting cold. The great universal genius, the man we elevate to the level of a god, wasn't a prophet looking into the 21st century. He was a guy working from home who dropped his pen mid-sentence because dinner was ready and someone was yelling for him from the kitchen.
It's a remarkably humanizing image, but it also drives home the exact lesson the listener needs to take away from this deep dive.
So what does this all mean for us today?
Well, this raises an important question. In a world of absolute information overload, having a brilliant idea in isolation is completely worthless. You need a community to test it, to tell you when you are confusing the osmotic flow of sap with the pressurized circulation of blood.
Right.
And most importantly, you have to actually ship the project.
Really?
You have to finish the painting, publish the paper, hit send on the email. If it stays in your head or locked in a private notebook, it does not exist.
That's all about the transaction. But that idea that unpublished thought is just a private mental state, it makes me wonder about our own lives.
Yeah.
Building on Krieger's idea of these private, scattered notebooks that Leonardo left behind, think about what we are doing today with our personal digital lives.
We are generating an unprecedented, unfathomable volume of text and saved ideas.
Exactly. We all have thousands of fragmented notes in our phones. We have bookmarks we never read, hundreds of browser tabs left open, files scattered across Google Drive, Notion, Apple Notes, Slack messages we starred and forgot about.
It's overwhelming.
We are effectively creating our own unindexed digital mirror script. We hoard all this information, all these articles and fleeting thoughts, under the illusion that we possess knowledge. But are we really any different than Leonardo stuffing a masterpiece of a thought into a dusty box?
Probably not.
We're just building our own isolated digital attics that no one else can see? And honestly, looking at my own chaotic notes app, I'm not even sure my future self will be able to decipher half of it. So we have to ask ourselves, are you actually building knowledge, or are you just sketching helicopters in the margins while the soup gets cold?
That is a deeply sobering thought to leave on.
That's all for this deep dive. Go organize your notes, hit send on that project, and we'll see you next time.